rather wound up with you guys.
Very
Maybe
car
Foreman's would be
accident.
the drag.
We love you guys.
And forgive me for having my back to you for a minute. My name is Paul Schutte, and I'm a faculty member here at George Washington University. And if you look down the road, this is our distinguished intergenerational panel. It's been an interesting journey just putting this together, because there are people on the panel that I've never seen before. There are people on the panel that I have seen before. So rather than for me to attempt to introduce each person, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But before we start, I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was a draftee in 1968. I served for 2 years and 7 months in the Army. Spent 15 of those months in Vietnam as a medic. Came back, spent 9 years literally roaming the planet and trying to figure out what I was going to be when I grew up. And as we were just talking, I'm still wondering that. I lived in 11 different houses, had 6 different relationships, visited 17 different countries, and had 10 different jobs in that 9 years. I am happy to tell you, 40 years later, I've been working at the university for 20 years, been in the same relationship for 21, have lived in the same house for 13, and lived in Washington, D.C. for 25. It took me a while to get to the point where I was able to settle myself down. What we're going to do today is I'm going to have each person on the panel introduce themselves, and what I would like them to do is name, rank, when they left the service, where you were stationed, what branch and what job you had, and how long it's been since you have been in the civilian world. And then I have a series of questions which the panelists have in front of them, and we'll try to get to as many of the questions as we can, with the hopes that we can bridge some of the years between the conflicts and wars that we have all participated in, and hopefully have some wisdom, those of us who are wise, to share with the current group of veterans, because we've all been there. So, shall we start down here? Wait.
Gotta pick on the ginger kid,
Yeah,
right?
geez.
Always the ginger kids get picked on. My name is Roland Wolf, father of this young lady right here who made the mistake of listening to me and joined the Navy. I graduated in '67. Basically, I'll try and I'm not going to embarrass her too much. So, somewhat of a dysfunctional family. I'm one of 4, being the youngest. So, when I entered the military, training just made it worse. I joined the Marines and I actually went in January 14th of '69. I probably should have been sooner. I grew up in the Hispanic community. I grew up with Mexican guys, and I signed up in the Marines with 2 other gentlemen who wanted to go right after high school. I tried to talk them into staying for the summer because at that particular peak in time, our odds weren't going to be so great. They chose to go. By October '68, they were both killed. By January, I was back in, even though I got yelled at by their mothers and everything else. I made the mistake of listening to 2 older brothers that had spent time in the Army and went to Vietnam. They said instead of taking the 4-year plan, where I could have been guaranteed aviation mechanic and maybe had a real job, I took the 2-year just to try it out and ended up right outside Quezon, 7 miles from the DMZ in an artillery unit. Luckily, we had a guy named Nixon who was starting to pull the Marines out, so I only spent like a half a year, the last part of '69, but saw quite a bit of stuff, and it was very enlightening. From there, I tried to go into recon. they found out I could type, they put me in MPs, and I processed prisoners. And then when I went stateside in Camp Lejeune, after being in Vietnam where the rules were different, I couldn't stand stateside, so my career as a jarhead ended soon. I passed up several opportunities. They had a thing called Project Transition, which was for military guys to acclimate to the civilian world. Instead of taking the game warden job where I should have, which I loved, I went into police work, which was okay, but then I got out of the Marines. It's been 2 years. I don't think I was home 3 months. I was crawling the walls. I couldn't stand being home. I had to go to work, or I'm somewhat of an adrenaline junkie. So I went to work at Roadway Express, which was a very enlightening job for 2 years, loading and unloading freight in all climates with some of the most Appalachian geared people I've ever met in my life. So I decided to become a cop, and I spent 34 years. I got paid to look worse than I do now. Without going into what I did. Although I have people that wish I was still back there, I have a problem with authority. I guess that might have something to do with the red hair or something, but bosses hated me. All the people, when I became a supervisor, they all loved me. They wished I was still there, but when I cut my hair, my beautiful locks, ZZ Top and a few other people didn't have anything on me, but when I cut my hair, my back went out, and I've had 5 spinal operations since then. I guess it's the Samson thing, I don't know. But I've been told that it's surprising my car hasn't blown up. I'm from a town called Chicago Heights, Illinois. If you've seen the movie Casino, where Joe Pesci gets buried in the field, that was our mob boss from my town that put them in the Indiana cornfield. That's kind of, so basically, I am bored. I go fishing now. I'm trying to transition into become human again, because from the time I went into the service till I retired, I didn't know what it meant to relax. And I didn't want to. I enjoyed it. I kicked indoors. I did stuff that Bruce Willis wishes he could have did, but and I won't go any further and embarrass my daughter, but I have to do this. She was hoping I would never do this.
Oh, I don't mind.
This is the kind of cop I was.
Oh, God.
So, I saw more dead people on my jobs than I did in Vietnam, but I also went back in 2008. My son lives in Hong Kong, and he took me back to Vietnam in 2008. And I don't know what political opinions are, but them people are still getting treated poorly in South Vietnam. And if anybody thinks they got it bad in this country, go there and shut up. You know, and that's about all I got to say.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mike, the
Yeah?
man in the suit.
I don't even need a mic, yeah. My name is Dennis Francis Patrick Kevin Murphy Shaw. I'm a dumb Mick from New York. I wear this tie because, unlike my Marine brothers, I'm a graduate of the NCO Academy at Fort Benning, Georgia. In the Army, we learn how to tie ties. Unless we're the medics, of course.
What?
Yeah.
That was a medic.
Except for the medics and the Marines. But if it'll make you feel more comfortable, I'll take it off. I come from a military family. I was born during World War II. My old man was in the South Pacific. He was at Midway in Coral Sea. My little baby shoe, shellacked, flew from the mast of a minesweeper. And I have a letter signed by the commander of that small ship and all the crew, thanking me for the use of that shoe, because when the old man was shipped off of the USS Scuffle, the crew asked to retain the shoe because it brought them good luck. The old man retired, and he, at the age of 38, found out that 20 years in the Navy prepared him for nothing in the civilian world. And at the age of 38, he began college. I'm wearing his college ring because he graduated cum laude in 3.5 years, supporting a wife and 2 kids. If you're lucky enough to be in Yellow Ribbon program, or just lucky enough to have a modern GI Bill and you're enrolled here at the university, if my old man can do it, you certainly can do it. And he did. I was lucky enough to go to a small college, back in the days when a college degree was something you earned, it was not an entitlement, and you couldn't major in national security. Didn't want much to do with the military, and was lucky enough to get, I applied for the Peace Corps. I was part of the 50% of people at that time who were accepted for training, and I was part of the 2/3 of the people in training who made it overseas. I spent 2.5 years in Latin America. I taught 5th and 6th grade in Spanish. I worked in the slums of Guayaquil. I formed a soccer league that developed into a credit union. And meanwhile, the guys I graduated college with their little Buttervars, Maro TC, went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and then went to artillery units in the late 60s in the Republic of Vietnam. And they told me it was really not a well thought out, well planned, well led war. I came back on my 25th birthday, which is in May. I was sitting in my office in in a refurbished farmhouse in upstate New York between Rochester and Buffalo. And I was thinking how good my life was. I had a 6-year-old Thunderbird and a 22-year-old girlfriend, and I had a big job with what was then called the Office of Economic Opportunity. And I was planning a twice-a-week medical clinic for migrant workers. And I was coordinating Strong Memorial Hospital over here and the Head Start bus over there. And I thought things were really good. 2 years later, I received another Army Accommodation Medal, and I was in a place called Duc Pho, near Firebase Liz in southern Ipoh, south of Da Nang, south of Chulai. And like a lot of you who have been in theater, it was one of those places that no one will ever know about, and there will never be maps like the ones we saw in that earlier presentation. We received the Army Accommodation Medal during my service as a reward for not getting wounded every 6 months. So I have a bunch of Army Accommodation Medals. I'm very happy. I only served 10 months and 26 days because President Nixon said you can come home if you have 300 days in country. So there are a lot of disgruntled people wandering around who've been transferred from unit to another unit. My military service was basically recon. I went to NCO Academy. I volunteered for operations and intelligence, but military operations and intelligence may be a misnomer. The small print in that MOS is recon. I thought I'd be in a tactical operations center putting pins in a map and doing things that didn't work. We were undermanned. We had 25 guys in that unit, and we took 10 of them were killed or wounded in less than 11 months. And it was a small unit, and I was the old guy. I was 27. And these kids, much younger than today's Army, were mostly 18 and 19, away from home for the first time. And it tore me up. I could not put that experience together with an experience 3 years earlier when I was teaching school in Spanish in rural Ecuador. And I could not see a whole lot of difference between people trying to make a living by subsistence farming in South America and people out in the paddies who would be very nice to Americans during the day and then have to deal with Viet Cong at night. I got off the plane at 07:30 in the morning, and by 1800 hours at night, I was out of the United States Army with a thank you, a steak dinner, and DD-214. And no one said, you know, soldier, at some point you're going to have to grieve because those 10 losses in that tight unit are really going to impact you. Not me. And no one said that this may come as a surprise, but the people back home are not going to spit on you. They really don't care. I didn't believe that either, but I had a whole box of slides. I bought the 35mm slides, which is very old technology. I was prepared to explain the geopolitical significance of my military experience, and nobody cared. I spent almost 10 years before I found the help. In that 10 years, I never lived in the same place longer than a year's lease. I never held a job longer than a 9 months teaching contract, and we're in only a couple of those. I never was involved in an intimate relationship longer than 6 months. I was always moving. And for those almost 10 years, what helped me was the alcohol. And then there came a time when the alcohol no longer helped. And I was very lucky to find a group of peers. I found a group of ex-grunts and a civilian psychologist who was doing family psychology and finding and trying to help families. There was always a Vietnam vet in the background someplace. And for 12 weeks, we met weekly, and it was really a turning point in my life. Because it was the first time I could tell my experience to people who had been there and had similar experiences, and they made all the difference. So I'm a big advocate of peer counseling. I think the Department of Defense, the United States Army in particular, I get the head out of their collective anal cavity and start utilizing the extraordinary experience we have for guys who have been in Afghanistan, been to Iraq, have been in combat, know what it is like, and can be given a little bit of information to make them peer counselors to the troops coming home. These guys are coming home, 320,000 of them have been diagnosed with some sort of mental health issue, and the war is not over for them, and we need to do a much better job of connecting them to the help that's available.
Thank you.
End of speech. Thank you.
Do you want us to go through the questions?
Nah, let's see.
When we get done with that, I'll pick out a couple and throw them out.
I know a lot of people in this room, but let's go. I'm Seth. I went to the Naval Academy when I was 18. Was kind of I was a Top Gun generation person. I always wanted to be a Navy pilot, and I got there and realized a couple things. It took 10 years after you got out of the Naval Academy if you were a pilot, and you could be out and doing something else much earlier if you did, something different. So I tried being on a ship, and that didn't work out. I got seasick at the Naval Academy. I didn't see that coming. And the Marine Corps actually began to seem kind of cool. And I was a senior when 9/11 happened, and that kind of firmed it up. Whereas the year before, not enough people wanted to go Marine Corps to make the quota that year, which is 17% of the class approximately. Our year, we had to turn down 100 to 150 people who were pretty well qualified to be Marine officers, because everybody wanted to go and get in the fight and get to Afghanistan. That didn't happen quite the way we thought it would. I still haven't been to Afghanistan, but I went to the Marine Corps and became an amphibious assault vehicle officer. And if you've ever seen little tank-looking things come out of the back of the ship and somehow floating, they really shouldn't, but somehow we have a lot of bilge pumps in there, and then they go off, they'll sink pretty quickly. But it's a lot of fun. When I got to my first unit, it was the day that they'd gotten back from Iraq. And if you all remember what it was like in 2003, the war was over, we won, big victory, and I was like, oh, well, I guess I missed the war. And everyone told me, you missed the war. Wow, great time, and everyone coming back, and so I got a platoon of guys who just got back from the war, and I'm a Korean lieutenant. I didn't really, just, hey guys, I won the National Defense Ribbon, and they had really cool stories. So I was pretty intimidated by that, but I thought, well, the first thing to do to actually get deployed, and do something, since there's no war going on anymore. I went to Okinawa. When I was in Okinawa, everybody who came after me started going to Iraq, and that kind of ramped up again. So I came back and thought, all right, well, I need to get on, go over there and actually get to see something. So I got on a ship with the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, and we thought we were going to Iraq, and then the tsunami happened, so we went to Sri Lanka and Indonesia. We went to Kuwait, and they said, well, we don't really want to bring you to Iraq because we need a strategic reserve. And all of a sudden one day they said, all right, you're going. So we went to Baghdad, and we were out within about 2 months. And in one of those misguided fits of idealism, I called back to the battalion headquarters in California and said, sir, I want to go to the next deployment. So I came back, turned right back around, and went to Al-Anbar for 7 months. And that was in the end of 05, and at the time, you may remember some of this stuff, it was after Fallujah. But we went to Haditha and a town called Al-Qaim on the Syrian border, where Al-Qaeda had pretty much taken over the whole area, and even kicked the people who had been fighting us a year earlier out of their homes. So they, said, hey, lesser of two evils, and we took back those 2 cities. And after that, I thought I was going to get out, but somehow the Marine Corps Big Green Weenie, as they call it, found a way to get me in Tampa for 2 more years, running a reserve center. And I thought it was kind of a lot of fun, but I didn't really want to do the Marine thing anymore, so I decided to go to grad school. But because of that experience, I stayed with the Marine Corps Reserve, and I'm still in it today. And I'll keep to that so we can make sure you everything.
I want to make sure that because we've heard a lot of stories with what you talked about, his name and rank and or service history, and then something else you said.
How long you have been not in the military?
Oh. All right. Well, that's easy. That's now. Beverly Closa Bowser is my name. Retired. I'll start at the beginning and work back. I retired in 2010 as a colonel from the Air Force. I entered the Air Force, and I went off to the Air Force Academy in 1976 at the age of 17. Right out of high school, nobody in my family had ever been in the military at all. My dad was an educator and knew as a high school administrator, public school administrator, he'd been a high school teacher, then he'd been a principal, and then he was an administrator at this time. Knew that as the oldest of 6 kids, the best way for me to afford college would be if I could get into an academy. And it just so happened that that's the year that they were opening the service academies to women. So I entered in the first year that they opened the service academies, all Air Force, West Point, and Annapolis to women. Graduated in 1980, went into logistics, munitions initially, doing munitions supply, doing logistics. At 1985, I got off active duty. I already had one child at that time. Since the years have passed, I had 5 altogether. But I had one at that point and was facing what we in the Air Force at that time had. They call them deployments today, but they called them remotes back then. So I was facing a 1 to 2 year remote with an 18-month-old child. So I said, I'm not going to do that. Joined the reserve, and as a reservist, first thing I tried to do was get a civilian job. I was a captain when I first got off active duty. I've been in charge of up to 85 people and many millions and millions of dollars worth of assets, because everything that exploded on the base where we had nuclear weapons was under my purview as a munitions officer. So that's a lot of assets to be responsible for. And as I got out and went into the civilian world and was no longer in uniform, I found that every job interview I went on, I was asked how many words per minute I could type. And I didn't like that. I served as a waitress for about a year and a half. And I said, this is just not right. So I turned around and went back. I did as much reserve duty as I could. So I ended up, when I retired in 2010, I had 20 full years of military time in my 30 years of duty. In the decade that I was kind of a foot in both camps, I was a civilian and a reservist at the time. I did a lot of extra reserve duty, but I also had the opportunity to have a family and allow a family to be top priority at the time. I went back to full-time military duty in 1995 when I attended Army War College in residence. I stayed on the faculty there for a year. I did wargaming, and then I went to the faculty at Air War College for another 2 years. After that, I moved into space operations, where I became a launch operations officer down at Patrick Air Force Base. Launched many of the Delta, the Titan, a bunch of the rockets that we sent satellites up into space. But the best one was to launch the space shuttle with one of my former roommates on board. Sue Helms was one of my roommates at the Air Force Academy. So that was a pretty good event. I was deployed to Korea for War Games, where I was in the role of Director of Space Forces over there. And after that, I was deployed in order to continue to get my full 20 years time as a reservist.